I arrived in Barcelona late at night, exhausted from the flight. The summer heat lingered in the air, heavy and sticky, even as I stepped out of the airport. I had been searching for a decent apartment to rent for weeks, but everything was either overpriced or fully booked. The only affordable option I found was a private room in an apartment, listed as a 2-bedroom flat shared with the owner, a single woman with a cat. It seemed fine. Simple, nothing luxurious, but good enough for my stay. I had rented it mainly because I needed a place to work. I couldn't afford to blow my budget on a full apartment, but I at least wanted somewhere quiet, clean, and comfortable. The listing had shown a modest, tidy bedroom with a double bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the street. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. The host had messaged me throughout the day, reminding me of check-in instructions. She seemed friendly. I had no reason to be suspicious. After taking a taxi from the airport, I arrived at the building. It was old, with graffiti covering parts of the exterior walls, but that wasn't unusual in Barcelona. The area itself was lively, narrow streets lined with restaurants and bars still buzzing despite the late hour. I found the entrance, rang the buzzer, and after a few seconds, the door clicked open. I lugged my suitcase up the stairs, tired but relieved to finally be here. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as I reached the landing, the door swung open before I even knocked. The woman standing there was smiling. She had a warm, overly enthusiastic energy, like someone greeting an old friend. She didn't turn on the lights as she led me inside, which struck me as odd, but I was too exhausted to care. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I noticed something strange. The place was a disaster. Even in the dark, I could make out piles of clothes, bags, and random objects scattered across the floor. The air was stuffy, with a faint, unpleasant smell lingering. She led me to my room, gesturing toward it like a game show host presenting a prize. I stepped inside and immediately felt my stomach sink. The room was the same one from the pictures, but it was completely empty. No bed, no desk, just a broken, sagging couch sitting where the bed should have been. I hesitated. I wanted to say something, but my brain was fogged with exhaustion. I had spent hours traveling. I needed sleep. So, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. I could deal with it in the morning. I set down my suitcase, did a quick check for bed bugs, because at this point, I wouldn't have been surprised, and lay down on the awful couch, using my jacket as a pillow. The springs dug into my back, but I didn't care. Sleep took over quickly. I woke up sweating. The heat in the room was unbearable. Sunlight streamed through the window, making the whole place feel like an oven. My back ached from the couch, my neck stiff from the awkward position I had slept in. The first thing I noticed was the noise. Loud voices, footsteps, laughter. I sat up, still groggy, and glanced toward my door. It was slightly open. I had assumed this was a 2-bedroom apartment, just me and the owner. But now, I was hearing multiple people. I stood up and stepped into the hallway. That's when I realized the place was much bigger than I thought. There weren't just 2 bedrooms, there were 4. And from what I could see, the other 2 rooms weren't regular bedrooms. They were crammed with bunk beds. Each room had at least 3 sets, meaning there were at least 12 people living in this apartment. 12 people. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just a rental. This was some kind of illegal hostel. I tried to process it, but then I saw something that made my skin crawl. The owner was in the living room, sprawled out on what looked like a set of massage tables. She wasn't alone. There was a man next to her, completely naked. They were both naked. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man rolled over, half asleep, stretching like a cat. He wasn't some random guest. He was clearly her husband or boyfriend. I turned away quickly, feeling my face heat up with embarrassment and disgust. I made my way to the bathroom, needing to splash water on my face to clear my head. But as soon as I got there, I realized I had another problem. There was only one bathroom, one toilet, one shower, for 12 people. A line had already formed. Some of the other guests were sitting on the floor, waiting their turn. The air smelled of sweat and mildew. Hygiene was clearly not a priority here. I backed away, deciding I could wait. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to at least get some water. But as soon as I stepped inside, I froze. Cockroaches. Big, fat cockroaches crawling along the counters. I had lived in cities before. I knew cockroaches were common. But this was something else. There were dozens of them, scattering when I stepped closer. And to make things worse, the owner had put a lock on the fridge. I later found out that guests weren't allowed to use it. If you wanted to store food, you had to pay extra. Same with the laundry. If you wanted to wash your clothes, you had to pay her. I spent most of that afternoon in my room, trying to work. But the noise was unbearable. And then, at some point, I heard something that made my stomach turn. Moaning. Loud, unmistakable moaning. I felt my skin crawl. I forced myself to look out into the hallway. The owner and her husband were in the living room, having sex. On the massage tables. They didn't care that there were 12 other people in the apartment. They didn't care that the doors were open. They didn't care about anything. And then, as if to top it all off, when they finished, they left a bottle of anal lube on the living room table. Just sitting there, like a bottle of ketchup. That was it. I needed to get out. I contacted Airbnb, sent them pictures, explained everything. Their response: they refused to do anything. They told me I had to ask the owner for a refund. I did, and the owner physically threatened me. At that moment, I knew I had only one option. I told her that if she didn't give me a refund, I would report her to the city authorities. Barcelona has strict laws against unregistered Airbnbs, and I knew she wasn't following them. She panicked. We went back and forth, but in the end, she caved. I got part of my money back, enough to book a hotel for the next few nights. I grabbed my bags and left. As soon as I was outside, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I reported the listing. A few days later, it was gone from Airbnb. I don't know if they shut it down or if she just changed the name and kept renting it, but I do know this. I will never stay in a shared Airbnb again. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun started dipping below the horizon. The house was a single-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, just a standard, well-kept house with beige siding and a small front porch. Nothing about it stood out, which I liked. It was exactly the kind of place I wanted for a short, peaceful getaway. I turned off the car and exhaled, stretching my fingers from the steering wheel. It had been a long drive, and I was glad to be here. I checked my phone for the entry instructions. There it was, the code for the electronic door lock, just as the Airbnb listing had provided. Before heading in, we decided to grab the groceries first. It made the most sense. Some of the items needed refrigeration, and I didn't want anything spoiling while we unpacked the rest of our things. I stepped up onto the porch, entered the code into the keypad, and heard the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. The door swung open easily. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cleaning products. It was a little dim, the evening light filtering through closed blinds. I reached for a light switch, flipping it on. A warm, yellow glow filled the entryway, leading into an open-concept kitchen and living room. The kitchen was our first stop. Carrying in the first round of grocery bags, I made my way to the refrigerator. I grabbed the handle, pulled it open, and froze. The fridge was packed. Not just with a few forgotten items or condiments left behind by previous guests, but completely full. There were eggs, a half-used gallon of milk, a plastic container of what looked like leftovers, juice, yogurt, and a nearly full stick of butter. In the crisper drawers, vegetables were still wrapped in store packaging, fresh enough that they hadn't gone bad yet. A loaf of bread sat on the counter beside a half-used jar of peanut butter. My stomach tightened. This wasn't normal. I glanced over my shoulder at the rest of the kitchen. More things caught my eye, personal belongings, little items that no temporary rental should have. A coffee mug sat on the counter with a spoon still in it. Next to the sink, a cutting board had faint knife marks, as if it had been used recently. A dish towel hung over the oven handle. I stepped back, looking around, my mind racing. I called out, just in case. No answer. I walked further into the house, past the kitchen into the living room. It was neatly arranged, too neatly. The kind of neatness that comes from someone tidying up before heading out for the day, not from a property being staged for short-term rentals. A pair of house slippers sat beside the couch. A book with a bookmark sticking out lay on the coffee table. There was a small pile of unopened mail sitting in a tray by the front door. I hurried back outside to the car, my pulse pounding. We weren't supposed to be here. This wasn't just a house that hadn't been properly cleaned. Someone still lived here. Back in the car, I pulled up the Airbnb app and found the customer service number. After what felt like forever on hold, I finally got through. I explained what we had found, my voice tight with anxiety. The rep on the phone was calm, almost too calm. They assured me it was fine, that the homeowner had been supposed to clear out their belongings, but apparently hadn't gotten around to it. The house was still ours to stay in, they said. We should just push things aside and make ourselves comfortable. That didn't sit right with me. This wasn't a few leftover items. It was a house that someone had clearly been living in. I voiced my concerns, but they brushed it off. The owner assured us it's fine, they repeated. You're good to stay. Against my better judgment, I hesitated, then finally decided to go back inside. We agreed that if we were going to stay, we needed to at least clear some space. I didn't feel right leaving someone's things lying around, so I started moving items into a large hall closet near the kitchen. That's when I found the medication. Half-used bottles, prescription labels still intact. I held one up, my eyes scanning the name of the medication. It was unfamiliar, but a quick look at the accompanying paperwork told me everything I needed to know. These were cancer medications. Strong ones. Medications used in aggressive treatments. The paperwork was what really made my stomach drop. It was a mix of medical bills, insurance forms, and handwritten notes. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Whoever had lived here had been receiving treatment for stage 4 cancer. I sat back on my heels, the papers still in my hands. I pieced things together as I sifted through more documents. Hospital discharge papers, appointment schedules, then, finally, a form indicating the transportation of remains. A one-way trip. Suddenly, everything made sense. The owner had passed away, and from what I was seeing, their children, who must have inherited the house, had never come back to clear it out. Instead, they had decided to rent it out as an Airbnb, leaving everything as it was. A terrible feeling settled in my chest. We weren't just staying in someone else's home. We were staying in the remnants of someone's life, frozen in time. The mail on the counter hadn't been checked because no one was here to check it. The half-used food in the fridge had belonged to someone who never came back. The book on the table was left open to a page that would never be finished. And here we were, strangers, picking through what was left behind. I looked around again, and now the house felt different. Not haunted, not eerie in a supernatural way, but heavy with absence. Like walking into a room where someone had just been, only to realize they were never coming back. We couldn't stay here. I picked up my phone and called the Airbnb support line again. This time, I didn't ask. I told them we were leaving. I wasn't going to sleep in a stranger's home, surrounded by their unfinished life, their uncollected mail, their untouched food. I demanded a refund. After a long back and forth, they finally relented. We packed up, took our groceries back to the car, and left. I didn't look back as we pulled out of the driveway. The Airbnb listing disappeared from the site a few days later. I don't know if the family finally came to clear things out, or if someone else booked it, only to have the same experience we did. But I do know one thing. Some places aren't ready to be rented. Some homes aren't meant to be stayed in by strangers. And sometimes, you walk into a house thinking it's just another vacation rental, only to realize it's something else entirely. Narvik, Norway. The farthest north you can travel by train in Europe. I had spent the summer in Sweden, working remotely and exploring, and I wanted to end my trip with something different. The long, 20-hour train ride from Stockholm seemed like the perfect way to see more of Scandinavia. And since it was still late summer, the landscapes would be incredible. I booked a private room in an Airbnb, just a basic setup, an apartment with a male and female couple who lived there. The communication with them had been fine leading up to my arrival, and they told me they wouldn't be home when I got there. They left the key in a lockbox by the door, so it seemed simple enough. By the time I arrived, I was exhausted. The train ride was scenic, but long, and I was eager to drop my bags, maybe grab a shower, and find something to eat before I crashed for the night. I made my way through the small town toward the apartment building, following the directions the hosts had sent me. The area was quiet, almost eerily so. Narvik wasn't a bustling place, but I expected at least some movement, people coming home from work or out for an evening walk. Instead, the streets were empty. The wind coming off the fjord was cold, even in summer, and it carried a damp, metallic smell. I found the building an older, nondescript apartment block with peeling paint on the doors and rust along the metal stair railings. It looked worn down, but not unusual for a town this far north. I punched in the code, took the key, and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to the apartment. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't just bad, it was a stench that felt alive. Thick, sour, and suffocating. The kind of smell that settles deep into carpets and walls and never leaves. It was a mixture of sweat, old food, and something else. Something rotten. I hesitated at the door. A voice in my head told me to turn around, but I was exhausted, and I had already paid for the room. Maybe the place just needed to be aired out. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The mess hit me immediately. Clothes, shoes, and random junk were scattered across the floor. The kitchen was the first thing I saw to my left, and it looked like someone had been cooking when they left in a hurry. The electric stove was still on, a pan sitting on one of the burners with something charred and unidentifiable stuck to the surface. The air had that burnt food bitterness mixed with the stench of unwashed dishes piled in the sink. I turned off the stove. The last thing I needed was to start a fire. The apartment was dimly lit, but I could still see enough. The walls were stained, the furniture looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, and the floor had sticky patches where my shoes almost stuck when I stepped. I made my way toward my room, hoping that at least my space would be better. But when I opened the door, my stomach turned. The bed, if you could call it that, had crumpled, clearly used sheets on it. Stains I didn't want to think about. The floor was covered in random clothes, socks, underwear, and wrappers. A half-empty bottle of cheap liquor sat on the nightstand next to an overflowing ashtray. I took a deep breath, trying to push past the rising panic in my chest. Maybe the hosts had left in a hurry. Maybe they meant to clean but didn't have time. I told myself a lot of things in those first few minutes, just to keep from walking right back out the door. Then I saw the bathroom. It was small, just a toilet, sink, and shower crammed into a tight space. But the filth was overwhelming. The toilet bowl was stained yellow and brown, with streaks running down from the rim. The sink was crusted with dried toothpaste, hair, and grime. The shower had a moldy curtain, and the tiles were dark with mildew. There was no way in hell I was stepping barefoot in there. I backed out, my brain finally catching up to what my gut had been screaming since I opened the door. I needed to get out. I grabbed my phone and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi to book a hotel, but the network wouldn't work. I tried the credentials the hosts had sent, but nothing. Frustrated, I used my data instead, quickly searching for nearby hotels. My signal was weak, and by the time I loaded a list, I had eaten through nearly all my remaining data. I found a place not too far, but I needed to book it fast before I lost connection. I stepped outside to get a better signal. The cool air was a relief after the thick, rancid heat of the apartment. I stood on the landing, refreshing my screen, trying to complete my booking before I ran out of data entirely. That's when I noticed the old woman. She was on the balcony across from me, hanging laundry. At first, she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then she frowned. I glanced back at my phone, but she kept staring. When I looked up again, she was shaking her head slowly. I tried to ignore her, but she moved toward me, stepping closer to the railing. Her face changed, her eyes widening in alarm. She raised her hands above her head, baring her teeth like an animal. Then she growled. Not a sound of frustration. Not a casual, old person muttering. A deep, guttural, animalistic growl. She turned, pointed at the apartment behind me, and repeated the growl. Then she made a shooing motion toward the street, her wrinkled hands flicking urgently. I didn't need her to say more. I turned, ran back inside, grabbed my bag, and left the key on the table without even shutting the door. I didn't look back. I just walked. Fast. By the time I reached the hotel, my heart was still pounding. I checked in, went straight to my room, and locked the door. The relief of being in a clean space, away from that smell, away from whatever the hell that apartment was, I could finally breathe again. I never got an explanation for what happened in that place. I didn't ask. All I knew was that I had trusted my gut, and for once, I was glad I did. Costa Rica had always been on my list of places to visit, but I never expected my first trip there to be like this. My brother, his wife, their 2-year-old son, and I had all flown down for a friend's wedding. We had booked a 2-week stay in a private bungalow inside what was advertised as a secure, child-friendly compound. The listing had glowing reviews, beautiful pictures, and all the amenities we needed, including air conditioning, a washer and dryer, which was essential with a toddler in cloth diapers, and a fully stocked kitchen. It was supposed to be perfect. After the long flight, a brutal wait at customs, and a stressful rental car pickup, we were all ready to settle in, drop our bags, and get some rest. The drive to the Airbnb took us down winding roads, past lush green jungle, and through small towns with stray dogs wandering in and out of traffic. It felt like a different world from home, and I was excited to finally be here. As we got closer, I started noticing that the area didn't look quite like I expected. The pictures from the listing had shown a well-maintained resort-like compound with trimmed grass, palm trees, and smooth walking paths. Instead, we turned onto a dirt road full of potholes, dust kicking up behind the car as we crawled along at a snail's pace. And then we saw it. The secure, child-friendly compound was a yard full of cacti, broken glass, and scattered fire pits. There was no clear parking area, just uneven patches of dirt with some old car parts and a few half-buried beer cans. A couple of chickens pecked at the ground near a sagging wire fence, and beyond them was a cluster of mismatched buildings. My brother slowed the car. "This can't be it," I muttered. But the pin on the map said otherwise. As we pulled up, we saw something even stranger. A family, 2 parents and 2 kids, was inside the bungalow we had rented. They weren't just looking around or passing through. They had fully moved in. Their bags were inside, towels hanging over the railings, and one of the kids was running barefoot across the porch. I could already feel my stomach twisting. We got out of the car, still trying to process what was happening. The parents came outside, looking uncomfortable but not exactly surprised to see us. As it turned out, they had rented a different house on the property, a 2-story treehouse. But when they arrived, they decided they liked our bungalow better. So they just took it. They admitted they knew it wasn't theirs but figured no one else was coming, so they moved in anyway. I had no words. To their credit, they did apologize and started packing up their stuff when we asked what was going on. But that didn't change the fact that they had been touching everything in the house. This was right as COVID was starting to ramp up, and the idea of staying in a place where another family had just been living, touching every surface, using every dish, sleeping in the beds, it wasn't ideal. But we were tired. Maybe we could just wipe everything down, open some windows, and settle in. That plan lasted about 10 minutes. The moment we stepped inside, I knew there was no way we were staying. The house wasn't just dirty, it was infested. The doors to the outside all had huge, 2-inch gaps at the bottom, meaning anything could crawl in, and everything had. The kitchen was swarming with ants, moving in thick lines across the counters and into the cabinets. Huge spiders lurked in the bathroom corners, their thick legs twitching as they clung to the walls. Roaches clung to the ceiling, and the sound of them skittering over the wood sent chills down my spine. Then we realized the air conditioning didn't work. Neither did the fans. The place was already humid and stifling, and now we had no way to cool it down. The final straw came when my sister-in-law went to check the washer and dryer. They weren't there. The listing had clearly said we would have one, but when we messaged the host, he brushed it off. "Oh, someone will pick up your laundry and do it for you." That wasn't going to work. Not with a toddler in cloth diapers. The idea of handing over our kids' soiled diapers to some stranger and waiting for them to bring them back, who knew when, was insane. At that point, my sister-in-law looked ready to kill someone. We gave up. We immediately started looking for another Airbnb, anything that wasn't crawling with bugs and falling apart. After an hour of searching, we finally found a place about 10 minutes down the road. It was available, it looked clean, and it actually had the amenities it promised. We booked it, packed our bags back into the car, and left. The host was furious. The moment he realized we were leaving, he started sending messages, accusing us of overreacting, saying we were ruining his business, that we were exaggerating about the bugs. Then he left us a bad review on Airbnb, painting us as difficult guests who had made up complaints to get out of our stay. And to top it all off, we didn't even get all our money back. We had booked for 2 weeks, and even though we were there for less than a day, the refund process was a nightmare. Airbnb sided with him for most of it, and we ended up eating the cost of several nights before they finally agreed to refund part of the stay. The only silver lining was that the second place we booked was beautiful. Clean, modern, exactly as described. It was everything the first place wasn't. The rest of the trip ended up being great, but that first day was a disaster. It was a lesson learned the hard way. No matter how nice the pictures look, no matter how good the reviews are, you never really know what you're going to get until you step inside. It was the summer of 2018, my brother's bachelor party, a week-long trip to a remote Airbnb cabin deep in the forests of Wyoming, the kind of place where you could drive for miles and never see another soul. No stores, no gas stations, no streetlights, just dense, endless trees and an occasional dirt road cutting through the wilderness. It was a beautiful place, though. The cabin itself was big enough for the 6 of us, 2 floors, a wide porch, and a small river within walking distance. The air was crisp and clean. The nights were silent except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of the trees. No traffic, no city noise, no distractions, just us, the outdoors, and the endless green of the forest. The first few days were everything we wanted. Hiking during the day, playing football in the clearing near the cabin, grilling out as the sun set behind the pines. The air smelled of burning wood and sizzling meat, beer bottles clinking together as we sat around the fire talking about nothing and everything. No responsibilities, no stress, just the kind of freedom that only comes with being completely disconnected from the outside world. By the 4th day, things got heavier. The hikes got shorter, the beers got stronger. We sat around the cabin, drinking like it was a competition. Someone found an old speaker in the cabin, and we blasted music late into the night, shouting over each other about old memories, exes, regrets, inside jokes that didn't even make sense anymore. Bottles scattered across the wooden floors, cigarettes burned down to their filters on the porch railing. We were reckless, messy, loud. That night, we drank until we couldn't anymore. One by one, we crashed wherever we landed. 2 of my brother's friends passed out on the living room couch, snoring loudly, beer cans still clutched in their hands. Another sprawled out on the floor with a jacket over his head. My brother made it to his bed, and somehow, I managed to get up the stairs to my room. Then, at around 4 a.m., I woke up with a sick feeling in my stomach. The kind of sickness that demands immediate action. I stumbled out of bed, barely making it to the bathroom before I vomited everything I had in me. The room spun as I leaned over the toilet, gripping the edges like they were the only thing keeping me from falling into some endless abyss. When it was over, I sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, waiting for the dizziness to pass. My head pounded, my throat burned, but at least the nausea was gone. I rinsed my mouth with water from the sink, splashed some on my face, and finally felt stable enough to walk back to my room. That's when I saw it. As I stepped out of the bathroom and turned toward the stairs, my eyes caught movement in the living room below. A faint, pulsing glow. Red light. I froze. At first, my foggy, drunken brain struggled to process what I was seeing. A man, standing in the living room. A stranger. He looked to be around my age, maybe mid-20s. White, short brown hair, wearing a plain t-shirt and shorts. No shoes. He held a flashlight, but the beam wasn't white. It was red, casting an eerie glow over the room. And he was shining it directly at my brother's friends on the couch. Slowly, methodically, as if studying them. My breath caught in my throat. Who the fuck was that? For a second, I thought I was hallucinating, maybe still too drunk to see clearly. I rubbed my eyes, blinked hard. When I looked again, gone. The red light, the man, all of it. Nothing but darkness. I stood there, my body tensed, waiting for something, anything to happen. A sound, a movement, a door creaking open. Nothing. I leaned over the wooden railing, trying to get a better view of the living room below, but it was pitch black. The only light was the faint glow from the dying embers in the fireplace. I needed to turn on the lights, but the switch was downstairs, right near the bottom of the steps. I hesitated, my mind racing. Had I really just seen someone? Or was it a drunken trick of the light? I turned back toward my room to grab my phone, only to realize I had left it downstairs with the others. Shit. For the next several minutes, I just stood there, completely still, listening. My ears strained against the silence, trying to pick up the sound of movement, a breath, the shuffle of footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. No doors opening, no windows creaking. The cabin was silent. After a long time, I finally moved. Slowly, carefully, I stepped back into my room and shut the door. I didn't bother locking it. I knew that if someone had already gotten inside, a flimsy wooden lock wouldn't do shit. Instead, I sat down on the edge of my bed and just listened. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every small noise, every gust of wind, every shifting floorboard sent my heart pounding. But nothing happened. When morning finally came, I stepped out of my room, my body aching from sitting stiffly for hours. Sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the cabin with its usual warmth. Everything looked normal. No open doors, no broken windows. No footprints on the dusty wooden floors. I checked the locks. Secure. The windows? All shut tight. I told my brother what I had seen. He laughed, chalked it up to a drunken hallucination. His friends did the same, insisting they would have woken up if someone had been in the room shining a red flashlight on them. But I know what I saw. A man, standing there, watching. And to this day, I still don't have an explanation. Who was he? How did he get into the cabin? Why was he carrying a red flashlight? And more importantly, how did he leave without making a single sound? The cabin was miles from the nearest road. No cars. No signs of footsteps outside. No way someone just happened to wander into our cabin that deep in the woods, in the middle of the night, in nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. I never found out the truth. I never saw that man again. But every time I think back to that night, I can still see the red light glowing faintly in the darkness. I needed a place to stay for a month. My lease was up, and I was between apartments, waiting for the paperwork on a new spot to go through. Moving in with friends wasn't an option, and hotels were too expensive, so I figured Airbnb would be my best bet. I'd stayed in a few before, mostly short-term, but this time I needed something longer. I scrolled through listings until I found a decent one. A small apartment in a quiet part of town, nothing fancy but affordable. The host had good reviews. A middle-aged guy named Mark. His profile picture was just him, smiling in front of a white wall, nothing memorable about it. The listing mentioned he worked from home, but wouldn't be around much. That was fine with me. I just needed a place to sleep, shower, and work from my laptop. The apartment itself was basic but comfortable. A small living room with a couch, a coffee table, and a TV that didn't have any streaming apps, just basic cable. A kitchen with mismatched plates and silverware. A fridge that made a weird buzzing sound sometimes but worked fine. The bedroom was small, just a bed and a dresser, but it was clean, and that's all I cared about. For the first week, everything was fine. I worked, went out, came back, and barely saw the host. I'd hear him sometimes in his part of the unit, a separate section of the house connected by a locked door, but we never really crossed paths. Then, I started seeing a girl. We'd met a few weeks before, and things were going well. Nothing serious, just casual. She'd come over a couple of nights, we'd hang out, watch a movie, and she'd stay over. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's when things got weird. A few days after she first stayed the night, I woke up to an email from Airbnb. A message from the host. He was concerned. Said he had noticed I was bringing women over late at night, and wanted to remind me that the apartment was for one guest only. I thought it was weird that he even knew, but whatever. Maybe he saw her come in. Maybe he heard us. I responded, saying I understood, but she was just a friend, not another guest. A few nights later, she came over again. The next morning, another message from the host. This one was more direct. He accused me of bringing prostitutes back to the apartment. Said he had seen it before and wouldn't allow that kind of behavior in his place. I was stunned. Where was this coming from? I ignored the message for a while, unsure how to even respond. Eventually, I replied, telling him he was mistaken, but I could tell from his wording that he had already made up his mind. After that, the vibe in the apartment changed. I started noticing things that hadn't stood out before. The way the Wi-Fi seemed to slow down when I was on my laptop late at night. The way the locked door leading to a section of the unit seemed different. One night, I walked past it and thought I heard movement. A slight shuffling sound, like someone shifting their weight. The door had no peephole, no way for me to see what was on the other side. I stood there for a moment, listening, but the sound was gone. Then the small things started adding up. One evening, I came back from dinner and found the thermostat turned up way higher than I ever set it. Almost like someone had come in and changed it. Another night, I went to grab a bottle of water from the fridge and realized the position of things had shifted. The condiments in the door weren't where I'd left them. The carton of eggs was on the wrong shelf. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was imagining it. But then I noticed something that I knew I hadn't done. The bathroom mirror had smudges on it. Faint streaks, like someone had wiped it with their palm. That was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that someone had been in the apartment when I wasn't there. I started getting anxious. I locked my bedroom door at night, even though it didn't feel like enough. I started checking the front door multiple times before bed, making sure it was secure. But the messages kept coming. The host was persistent. He knew I had company over. He was certain I was bringing prostitutes back. He said he had evidence. What evidence? I started to wonder if there were cameras in the apartment. It wasn't supposed to be allowed, But how else was he so sure of what I was doing? How was he so confident? I searched, checked the smoke detectors, the vents, even the tiny cracks between the ceiling panels. I didn't find anything, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I told the girl about it, and she didn't come back after that. Said it was too creepy. I couldn't blame her. Then, the worst message came. Airbnb had suspended my account. The host had reported me for violating house rules, claiming I had repeatedly brought escorts to the apartment. Said I was engaging in illegal activity. I tried to fight it, but Airbnb support wouldn't listen. They valued the host's safety concerns and upheld the suspension. My month-long stay had been cut short, and I had 3 days to leave. By that point, I was relieved. I packed my things immediately, but I still had to stay those last few nights. I barely slept. I kept expecting to hear the locked door creak open in the middle of the night. I kept thinking I'd wake up to find the host standing over my bed. On my last night there, something happened that still makes my skin crawl. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. My bags were packed. I just needed to make it through one more night. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard something. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the other side of the locked door. I held my breath, listening. The tapping continued. Soft, deliberate. Not like someone accidentally bumping into the door, but like someone waiting. I stayed completely still. After maybe a minute, the tapping stopped. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then the knob twisted. It didn't turn all the way, just enough to test if it was locked. I stayed frozen. My body was rigid, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake the bed. Then silence. I waited, staring at the door, for what felt like hours. Nothing else happened. No footsteps. No retreating sounds. Just silence. When morning finally came, I grabbed my bags and left without looking back. I still don't know what the host's deal was. If he really believed what he was saying, or if it was just an excuse to get me out. If he was watching me. If he had been inside my apartment when I was gone. All I know is that when I looked up his listing a month later, it was gone. His account gone. And I never found out why. I was driving across the U.S., a trip I had planned for months. Nothing fancy, just me, my car, and a rough route mapped out through different states. I wasn't trying to stay in hotels every night. That would have drained my budget fast. Airbnb was the way to go, and I usually stuck to the cheapest options. Rooms in shared houses, couches, whatever worked. That's how I ended up at this place in Kansas City, Missouri. The listing was simple. Couch to crash on. It was cheap. Really cheap. The reviews were mixed, but most of them just mentioned that it was basic. That didn't bother me. I wasn't looking for luxury. Just a place to sleep. I booked 2 nights. When I arrived, it was late evening. The house was a single-story rental, in a part of town that felt rundown, but not outright dangerous. The kind of place where people kept their porch lights off and their blinds shut. I knocked, and after a moment, the host answered. He looked like he was in his late 20s, a little older than me. Thin, pale, unshaven. He had that wiry kind of build, like someone who either ran marathons or just didn't eat much. His clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He barely spoke, just nodded, stepped aside, and let me in. Inside, the place was dimly lit and cluttered. The kitchen was immediately to my left. The counter was covered in bottles of supplements, vitamins, powders, pills, and unmarked containers. More than I'd ever seen in one place. There were no plates, no cups, no forks or spoons. Just 2 knives sitting on the counter. The trash can was overflowing with Uber Eats bags, stacked on top of each other, like he hadn't taken the garbage out in weeks. The air smelled stale, like old takeout and unwashed laundry. Then there was the couch. It wasn't really a couch. It was 2 large armchairs side by side. Not even close to something you could stretch out on. I stood there for a second, looking at them, trying to figure out how the hell I was supposed to sleep. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. The guy turned to me and said, well, he didn't say anything because I wasn't going to include dialogue, but he made it clear. No pissing while standing. That was a house rule. I had to sit down to pee. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. I just nodded, threw my backpack down by the couch, and sat for a minute, taking in the room. The host stuck to his room after that. He didn't make small talk. Didn't ask about my trip. Just disappeared behind a door, leaving me alone in the cluttered, dimly lit house. I sat there, scrolling on my phone, trying to ignore the feeling in my gut. Something about the place was off. It wasn't just messy. It wasn't just cheap. It was something else. I got up to use the bathroom. Inside, the sink was full of hair. Not just a little. Clumps of it. Like someone had shaved their head and just left it there. The shower curtain was missing. The mirror was streaked with old water stains. The toilet seat was down, and I sure as hell wasn't about to lift it to see what was underneath. I did what I needed to do sitting down, because I wasn't in the mood to test house rules. When I got back to the couch, I tried to settle in. I shifted, twisted, turned, but there was no way to get comfortable. The air felt heavy, like the walls were pressing in. The house was too quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, where everything feels peaceful. The bad kind. The kind where you feel like something is watching you. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hair in the sink, the knives on the counter. The host barely saying a word. My mind started spinning. Why did he need that many supplements? Why no cutlery, but 2 knives? Why no standing to pee? It wasn't one big thing that made me uneasy. It was 100 little things stacking up in my brain. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a creaking sound. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. Silence. I lay there, completely still, listening. Then I heard it again. A slow creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floor. Coming from the hallway. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited. Listened. Nothing. But that was worse. Because now I knew I wasn't alone in the room. My gut was screaming at me, leave. I grabbed my bag, moved as quietly as I could to the front door, and slipped out. My car was parked just down the street. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there, trying to calm my heartbeat. I didn't know what had woken me up. Maybe the house was just old. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe it was nothing. But I wasn't going back in. I grabbed my phone, canceled my second night, and found a 24-hour gas station nearby. I drove there, parked, and slept in my car. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't great. But it felt safe. The next morning, I got back on the road, leaving Kansas City behind. I've stayed in a lot of weird places since then. Some dirty, some uncomfortable, some just plain gross. But that house, that was the only one that ever made me feel like I needed to run. I booked the place because it looked different from anywhere I'd stayed before. Most Airbnbs were modern apartments or basic homes, but this one had character. A Victorian-style house, built in the early 1900s, tucked away on a quiet street lined with old trees. The photos showed antique furniture, floral wallpaper, and those old-fashioned chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a museum. It wasn't the cheapest option, but the idea of staying in a house with real history appealed to me. It felt unique, like something out of a novel. The reviews were good, too. Guests raved about how cozy and charming it was. The host, Lisa, was friendly in her messages. She let me know she and her husband would be out of town during my stay, but if I needed anything, her co-host, David, lived nearby and could help. That was fine with me. I actually liked the idea of having the whole house to myself for a few nights. When I arrived, the house looked just like the photos. Even better, actually. It had a towering, sloped roof, those tall, narrow windows you only see in old houses, and a front porch with a wooden swing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The floors creaked under my feet, and every piece of furniture looked like it had been there for decades. The bathroom, though, was small and felt different from the rest of the house. While the other rooms were carefully decorated, the bathroom seemed almost forgotten. Plain white walls, an old clawfoot tub, and a sink with separate hot and cold taps. The doorknob was one of those round brass ones, slightly discolored, with a keyhole beneath it. It felt stiff when I first turned it, but it worked, so I didn't think much of it. The first night was peaceful. I made tea, watched a movie on my laptop, and eventually went to bed. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak from the old wooden frame settling. I wasn't scared. If anything, I felt relaxed, like I had stepped back in time. The next night, though, everything changed. I had been out all day exploring the city, walking miles through different neighborhoods. By the time I got back to the house, my feet ached, and I was sweaty from the humid air. A hot shower sounded perfect. I plugged my phone into a small speaker and played music as I undressed. The shower water was surprisingly good, hot, with decent pressure, something you don't always get in old houses. The steam filled the room, fogging up the mirror. It was peaceful, standing there under the water, the sound of the music drowning out everything else. When I finished, I reached for my towel, dried off, and grabbed the doorknob to leave. It didn't turn. I frowned, tightening my grip and trying again. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, twisting the knob left and right, but it was stuck. The door didn't move. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. I took a deep breath. It's an old house. Old houses have weird quirks. Maybe the wood had swollen from the steam. Maybe the knob was just stiff. I tried again, gripping the knob with both hands, twisting with all my strength. Nothing. That's when my mind started racing. Had someone locked me in? The thought hit me hard. What if someone had been in the house while I was in the shower? What if they were in the bedroom right now, going through my stuff? I looked down at my phone, sitting on the sink. Thank God. If I hadn't brought it in to play music, I would have been trapped without any way to call for help. I pulled up the Airbnb app and messaged Lisa, my fingers shaking slightly. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my heart was pounding. She responded within a minute. She apologized, said the door had been acting up lately, and told me she'd call David, the co-host. That was good, but it didn't stop the uneasy feeling in my chest. I was still locked in, and I still didn't know why. I checked the keyhole under the knob, wondering if maybe I could unlock it myself. No key. Not that it would have helped. I was on the wrong side of the door. I sat on the edge of the tub, my legs bouncing as I waited. Every sound in the house felt amplified. A faint creak from the hallway, the distant ticking of a clock, the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the small space. Minutes passed. Then, finally, a knock on the front door. David. I shouted that I was in the bathroom. A moment later, I heard him moving through the house. Then, the sound of the knob turning from the outside. It stuck at first, then gave way with a loud click. The door swung open, and I practically stumbled out. I was shaking, wrapped in just a towel, but all I could think about was checking the rest of the house. I rushed to my bedroom. My bag was still there. My wallet. My laptop. Nothing was missing. So had the door really just jammed? Or had someone been there? I couldn't stop thinking about it. After David left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bathroom door, still slightly ajar. I could see the knob, sitting there innocently, like it hadn't just trapped me inside for nearly an hour. I couldn't sleep. The idea of being alone in the house suddenly felt wrong. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the floorboards. Every groan of the old wooden frame. I turned on every light in the house. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway. Even the bathroom, despite how much I hated looking at it now. I had never been superstitious, but that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that darkness meant vulnerability. That light was the only thing keeping me safe. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the lamps burning beside me. The shadows seemed less threatening that way. Morning couldn't come fast enough. By the time the sun finally rose, I had made up my mind. I packed my things, sent Lisa a polite but firm message explaining that I wasn't comfortable staying another night, and checked out early. She was apologetic, offered a refund for the remaining nights, but I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to be out of that house. Even now, I still don't know what really happened. Maybe it was just an old faulty doorknob. Maybe it was just bad timing. But a part of me still wonders, if I hadn't had my phone, how long would I have been in there? And worse, would I have been alone? Work trips can be exhausting, but at least this one came with an entire house to rent. That was the plan, anyway. A few coworkers and I were sent to another city for a big project, and instead of getting separate hotel rooms, we decided to pool our money and rent a house through Airbnb. It made sense. More space, a kitchen, and a living room where we could actually relax after long work days. We found a decent-looking house at a good price. The reviews weren't amazing, but nothing outright bad. Just complaints about it being a bit outdated. Old carpets, creaky floors, the kind of stuff you expect when you rent someone's house instead of staying at a hotel. Still, it had everything we needed. 3 bedrooms, decent location, and most importantly, air conditioning. We were going to be there for nearly 2 weeks, and with how hot it was, we needed that aircon running. We checked in late on a Sunday evening. The house was nothing special, but it was clean enough. A little dated, sure, but we weren't there to admire the decor. We settled in, unpacked, and adjusted the thermostat. It was a bit warm inside, so we turned the air down to a comfortable level and called it a night. The next day, we all went to work early. Long day, full of meetings, deadlines, all the usual chaos. When we got back, something felt off. The air conditioning was warmer than we'd set it. At first, we thought maybe it had an auto setting that adjusted on its own, but when we checked, someone had manually changed it. That didn't sit right with me. We were the only ones staying there. No cleaners were scheduled to come. No one had a key except the owner. It took a second for the realization to hit. The host had been inside the house while we were gone. We tried to shake it off. Maybe he had some system in place where he could control it remotely. But no, this was an old-school thermostat. The only way to change it was to physically be there. A couple of days later, the same thing happened. We came home, and the temperature had been changed again. This time, I checked the door locks, looking for any sign of tampering. Nothing obvious, but that uneasy feeling started to settle in. The next morning, one of my co-workers suggested we test it. Before we left, we took a tiny piece of tape and stuck it to the inside of the front door, high enough that no one would see it unless they were looking for it. If someone opened the door while we were gone, the tape would fall off. That day at work was long. I barely focused. The only thing I could think about was getting back to the house and checking the door. When we got back, I walked up first. The tape was on the floor. Someone had been inside. At this point, we were all on edge. We had no idea how often this guy was coming inside. Was it just the air conditioning? Or was he snooping through our things? That same evening, while we were sitting in the living room, someone knocked on the door. It was a real estate agent. They were there for a home viewing. Apparently, the house was up for sale, and people were scheduled to come walk through it. No one had told us this. No warning. No heads up. Just a random person showing up, expecting to walk through the place we were living in. We were so caught off guard that we just stood there, stunned. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, different people showed up at random times. Some with real estate agents, some just looking around on their own. We checked the listing again. Nowhere did it say the house was up for sale. We messaged the host, furious. No response. That's when we realized. The owner was coming inside whenever he wanted. Strangers were coming inside whenever they wanted. This was beyond unsafe. One afternoon, one of my co-workers came back to grab something during lunch. The host was inside the house. Not fixing anything. Not cleaning. Just standing in the hallway. When my co-worker walked in, the guy acted like he wasn't doing anything wrong. Like it was totally normal for him to just let himself in while we were renting the place. That was it. We packed up that night and contacted Airbnb to file a complaint. The violations were clear: entering without permission, failing to disclose that the house was on the market, and having random strangers show up without telling us. Thankfully, Airbnb refunded us for the remainder of the stay, and we booked a hotel instead. I've stayed in dozens of Airbnbs over the years, and most of them have been fine. But this experience, it made me second-guess every single host from then on. Now, whenever I book a place, I check for hidden cameras. I make sure the locks actually work. I look up the address to see if it's listed for sale. I never leave valuables behind during the day, because some people don't understand boundaries. They don't give a damn about their guests' rights. I was looking for a quiet place to stay for the weekend, somewhere peaceful where I could get away from the city and just relax. I found an Airbnb cabin in upstate New York that seemed perfect. The pictures showed a small, cozy house surrounded by trees, with a big wooden porch and a fire pit outside. It looked like the kind of place where you could sit outside with a cup of coffee in the morning and listen to the birds. The listing had good reviews, and the host seemed nice. He sent me a message after I booked, letting me know he lived out of town but would be available by phone if I needed anything. That was fine with me. I liked the idea of having the place to myself. I arrived in the late afternoon. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful: tall trees, winding roads, little streams running along the highway. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I was happy with what I saw. It looked just like the pictures. Small but well kept, with a stone path leading to the front door and big windows that let in a lot of light. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The key was under the doormat, just like the host said it would be. I let myself in and took a look around. The inside was simple but comfortable. A couch, a small dining table, a kitchen with a coffee maker, and a few basic appliances. The bedroom had a queen-sized bed with a thick comforter, and the bathroom was clean. The whole place had a warm, cabin-like feel to it. But then I noticed the basement door. It was in the hallway near the kitchen. a plain wooden door with a deadbolt on my side. That struck me as a little odd. Usually basement doors just have a regular handle, maybe a simple lock. But this one had a heavy-duty deadbolt, like the kind you'd put on an outside door. I wondered why. Maybe the host kept tools down there, or maybe there were plumbing pipes he didn't want guests messing with. Whatever the reason, I didn't think too much of it. I was here to relax, not worry about a basement. After unpacking, I made myself some food and watched a bit of TV. By the time the sun went down, I was already feeling tired from the long drive. I double-checked that the front door was locked, then went to the hallway and locked the basement door too, just out of habit. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. No messages, no missed calls. Everything was fine. I fell asleep pretty quickly. The noise. At 2 a.m., I woke up. It wasn't a sudden, jerking wake-up. It was more like my brain just slowly pulled me out of sleep because something felt off. I lay there in the dark, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything. But then, a dull thud. It sounded like it came from inside the house. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was pitch black except for a bit of moonlight coming through the window. I held my breath, listening harder. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then a faint creak, like wood shifting under pressure. It came from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to go out there, but I had to check. I slowly got out of bed, keeping the flashlight aimed toward the door. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I moved. When I stepped into the hallway, my stomach dropped. The basement door was unlocked. The deadbolt I had turned before bed was now open. I stood there, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. Had I forgotten to lock it? No. I was sure I had. Had it somehow unlocked by itself? That didn't seem possible. I took a slow step forward and reached out to touch the door handle. It was cold. I pushed on the door just a little, but it didn't budge. Whatever was down there, the door was still closed. I took a deep breath and quickly turned the deadbolt again, locking it. Then, just to be safe, I grabbed a wooden chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob. I backed away slowly, flashlight still pointed at the door. I stood there for a few more seconds, listening. Nothing. After a long moment, I forced myself to move. I walked back to my room, locking the bedroom door behind me. Then I lay in bed, wide awake, phone clutched in my hand. I barely slept the rest of the night. Every little noise made my skin crawl. The wind outside, the creak of the house settling, it all put me on edge. I kept my phone flashlight on for hours, just staring at the door, half expecting it to slowly open on its own. But nothing happened. At sunrise, I finally forced myself out of bed. I walked to the hallway, half expecting to see the chair moved or the lock undone again. But it was exactly how I left it. I stood there, staring at the basement door, trying to decide what to do. Did I want to open it? Did I want to see what was down there? No. I grabbed my bag, stuffed everything inside, and left. I didn't even bother making coffee or breakfast. I just got in my car and drove away. As I pulled out onto the main road, my phone buzzed. A message from the Airbnb host. Hey, hope you're enjoying your stay. Let me know if you need anything. I didn't reply. I left a neutral review, just something vague about the house being comfortable, but not quite what I expected. I didn't mention the basement. I didn't mention the lock. I just wanted to forget about it. Looking back, I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe the lock was faulty. Maybe the door settled weirdly in the frame, and that somehow caused the deadbolt to shift. Or maybe someone had been down there. Maybe they heard me lock the door and waited until I was asleep to quietly unlock it from the other side. I don't know, and I never want to. I had been traveling across the country for weeks, booking cheap Airbnbs along the way. Most places had been fine, some better than expected, some a little worse. Nothing special, just places to sleep before moving on to the next stop. This Airbnb was no different. I was passing through a small town in the Midwest and needed a place for the night. I found a listing that was cheap and had decent reviews. It was an old farmhouse, owned by a man who rented out a spare room. The pictures showed an old but well-maintained house with a big front porch and a quiet, empty road stretching out in front of it. It looked peaceful. The host's name was Gary. His profile said he was in his late 50s and had been renting out rooms for a few years. I didn't think much about it. I just needed a bed for the night. I booked the room, got the confirmation, and messaged Gary to let him know when I'd be arriving. He responded quickly, saying the front door would be unlocked, and I could just let myself in. I arrived late in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The farmhouse looked exactly like the pictures. White wooden walls, an old front porch, big empty fields on either side. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile down the road. I parked my car and grabbed my bag. The house was quiet. No lights on, no sign of Gary. I tried the front door. It was unlocked, just like he said. I stepped inside. The house smelled old, like dust, wood, and something faintly sour. The entryway opened into a small living room with a worn-out couch, a wooden coffee table, and a TV that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A single lamp in the corner gave off a dim, yellow glow. To my right was the kitchen. It was small and cluttered, dirty dishes in the sink, an overflowing trash can, and a counter covered in random stuff. I saw old newspapers, a broken clock, and what looked like an empty bird cage. Weird, but not my problem. I just wanted to find my room and get some sleep. There was a hallway leading toward the back of the house. 3 doors, one at the end and 2 on the sides. The door on the left had a small sign taped to it that said guest room. That was mine. The door on the right was closed, with no sign or markings. And the door at the end of the hallway? Locked. I tried the handle out of curiosity, but it didn't budge. I figured it was either Gary's room or a storage closet. Either way, it wasn't my business. I stepped into my room and shut the door. The guest room was small and plain. A twin bed, a wooden dresser, a tiny window with a curtain too short to fully cover it. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo above the bed. I looked closer. It was a picture of the house, but older. The paint was fresher, the trees in front were shorter, and instead of an empty road, there was a dirt path leading into the woods. It felt strange, but again, not my problem. I set my bag down and sat on the bed. That's when I noticed something. The house was too quiet. I've stayed in plenty of houses alone before, but this was different. There was no distant hum of a fridge, no creaking of the old wood settling, no sounds from outside, not even crickets. Just complete, unnatural silence. Something about it made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone. No service. Great. I turned on the Wi-Fi. Luckily, it worked. I sent a quick message to a friend, letting them know where I was staying for the night, just in case. Then I locked my door, got under the covers, and closed my eyes. I told myself I was just overthinking things. I woke up sometime in the night. At first, I didn't know why. The room was still dark. My phone showed 2:43 a.m. Then I heard it. A slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I lay completely still, my heart pounding. The sound wasn't coming from my room. It was coming from the hallway. Long, slow, dragging noises. It stopped. I held my breath. Then, a quiet tap on the wall. Just one, like someone was standing right outside my door. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The room lit up, but the noise had stopped. I sat up, listening. Nothing. Then a slow creak. The sound of a door opening. But not mine. The locked door at the end of the hallway. Who was in that room? I barely breathed. I didn't know what to do. I listened, trying to hear footsteps, but there was nothing. Just that awful silence again. I thought about leaving right then and there, but that meant stepping into the hallway, and I didn't want to see who, or what, had just come out of that room. I waited, gripping my phone. Minutes passed. No more sounds. I finally worked up the courage to get up. I moved slowly, trying not to make any noise. I crept toward my door, pressed my ear against it. Silence. I carefully unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack, peering out into the hallway. Dark. The only light was a faint glow coming from the living room. I stepped out, heart pounding, and moved quickly toward the front door. That's when I saw it. The locked door at the end of the hall. Wide open. I stopped, my breath caught in my throat. It was pitch black inside. I couldn't see anything. And then, a shuffle, like someone stepping back into the shadows. I didn't wait. I ran to the front door, grabbed my keys, and bolted out of the house. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I unlocked the door and jumped in. I slammed the locks down and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked back at the house, and the front door was open, just wide enough for someone to be standing behind it, watching. I didn't stay to find out. I sped down the empty road, not stopping until I was miles away. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat there, trying to calm my breathing. My hands were still shaking. I checked my phone. No service. I connected to the gas station Wi-Fi and went straight to Airbnb. I sent a message to Gary, asking if he had been home that night. No response. I went to the listing. It was gone. Deleted. I never got an answer to what happened in that house. Who was in that room? Was it Gary? Someone else? Or had that room been empty for years, until I arrived? I don't know. I don't want to know. I left a vague review about unexpected issues with the stay, and got a refund from Airbnb. I haven't used Airbnb since. I had been on the road for over a week, driving across several states for work. By the time I reached a small town in Texas, I was exhausted. I just needed a quiet place to rest for a couple of nights before continuing my trip. Hotels in the area were either too expensive or fully booked, so I turned to Airbnb. After some searching, I found a cheap listing, a private guest house behind someone's home. The reviews were mixed. Some people said it was clean and quiet, while others complained about the host being a little strange. The price was too good to pass up, so I booked it. The host's name was Tom. His profile said he was in his 60s, had lived in the town his whole life, and loved meeting new people. I messaged him to confirm my check-in time. He responded almost immediately, saying he would be home and would love to show me around. Something about that message made me uneasy, but I ignored it. I was just staying 2 nights. How bad could it be? The house was in a quiet neighborhood, about 10 minutes from the main highway. It was old but well-maintained, a single-story home with a big yard and a separate guest house in the back. I pulled into the driveway. As soon as I parked, Tom stepped out of the house. He was older than I expected, probably in his late 60s or early 70s. He was thin, with gray hair combed neatly to the side and a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I got out of the car and gave a quick nod. Tom walked up immediately, standing too close as he greeted me. "Welcome, welcome," he said, smiling wide. His eyes never blinked. I forced a polite smile and grabbed my bag. "The guest house is just back here," he said, leading me toward the small building behind the main house. As we walked, I noticed something strange. All the windows on the main house were covered. Thick curtains drawn tightly shut. Not a single one open. I brushed it off. Some people like privacy. Tom unlocked the guest house door and stepped aside. "Go ahead, take a look around," he said. I stepped inside. It was small but decent, a single room with a bed, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. A TV sat on a wooden stand across from the bed, and an old armchair rested in the corner. The place was clean, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it. It was like the air itself was heavy, like I was being watched. Tom stood in the doorway, smiling. "You should be comfortable here," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." Then he paused. His eyes moved slowly across the room, as if checking something. Finally, he nodded to himself. "Well, I'll leave you to it," he said, stepping back outside. I closed the door and locked it. Something about him bothered me. I set my bag down and walked around the room. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I sat on the bed and pulled out my phone. I checked my messages, scrolled through social media, and tried to ignore the weird feeling. Then I noticed something. There was a tiny red light in the corner of the room. I looked up. The smoke detector. It wasn't blinking. It was just a steady red light. I frowned. I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs, and smoke detectors don't usually have solid red lights. I stood up and walked over to it. Something about it seemed off. It was too big for a regular smoke detector. I reached up and twisted it. It came off too easily. Inside, where there should have been wires and sensors, there was a small black lens. A hidden camera. My stomach dropped. I turned around and scanned the room, heart pounding. How many more were there? I checked the TV, the armchair, the bathroom. I found 2 more cameras. One hidden in the vent above the bed and another inside the bedside lamp. I felt sick. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and my phone. I didn't care if I had paid for 2 nights. I was leaving. I swung the door open, ready to bolt to my car. And Tom was standing right outside. He was too close. His cold, dead eyes locked onto mine. "Everything okay?" he asked, tilting his head. I swallowed hard. I forced a stiff nod. "Yeah, just realized I have to leave early." His smile never faded. "You just got here." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, change of plans." His eyes flicked to the guest house behind me. For the first time, his smile twitched. A tiny break in his mask. He knew. He knew I had found the cameras. For a second, I thought he was going to block the doorway. But then he stepped back. "Well," he said, his voice flat. "That's too bad." I walked past him quickly, not turning my back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the driveway. I drove for miles, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I finally stopped at a gas station, I pulled out my phone and went straight to Airbnb. I reported the hidden cameras. I wrote down every detail, where they were hidden, what they looked like, how Tom acted. Then I called the police. They sent an officer to meet me at the gas station. I told him everything. He took notes, asked a few questions, then said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the first person to report that place." The officer told me they had gotten other complaints about Tom's Airbnb, but no one had ever pressed charges. They said they'd send someone to investigate. I never heard what happened after that. I checked Airbnb a week later, and the listing was gone. I still wonder how many people stayed in that guest house without realizing they were being watched. I wonder what Tom did with the footage. I don't know. I don't want to know. I just know one thing. I will never stay in an Airbnb again.